This video is sponsored by Aura. If you've ever experienced identity theft, think about what happened and how it impacted you. What did you learn from the experience, and what steps did you take to recover? Sharing your story can help others understand the importance of protecting their identity and inspire them to take action with Aura and their different features to avoid a similar situation. Data broker opt-out, identity theft protection, financial fraud protection, certified data security and privacy, VPN, antivirus, password manager, and 24/7 US-based support. Don't leave yourself open to hackers and scammers. Go to aura.com/KrystlynCrime to get your 14-day free trial. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video.
Genie Bostheater was born on April 21st, 1883 in Millicent, a village in South Holland, Netherlands. She was the second daughter of Johannes Bostheater and his second wife, Dina Caslander Bostheater. Genie grew up with 7 siblings: Susie, Gabriel, Joseph, John, Cora, Martin, and Lena, as well as 3 half-siblings, Art, Leonard, and Aggie. When Genie was 7, her family immigrated from the Netherlands to the United States, eventually settling in Paterson, New Jersey around 1890. At the time of her tragic death, she lived with her parents at 155 East 5th Street in the Riverside neighborhood and worked at the Patterson Ribbon Company on Veerland Avenue. On the evening of October 18, 1900, Genie Bostheater left her home around 8 p.m. to buy baby powder for her young niece at a nearby drugstore. While there, she encountered William A. Deeth and Andrew Campbell. Genie had previously dated Deeth, but he had abruptly ended their relationship and married another woman just 5 weeks earlier. After briefly speaking with them, Genie went inside the store. While Genie was in the store, Walter McAllister, a wealthy young man, approached Deeth and suggested inviting Genie to join them at Sal's Saloon, located nearby at the corner of River and Bridge Streets. Deeth convinced Genie to accompany him and Campbell to the saloon. McAllister later accidentally stopped by the saloon and, while Genie's back was turned, spiked her absinthe frappe with chloral hydrate. When she did not lose consciousness immediately, McAllister added a second dose of the drug, which proved fatal. After Genie passed out, McAllister summoned George Kerr, who was waiting nearby, and hired a cab driven by Augustus Schulthorpe. The men transported Genie to a secluded location where she was assaulted. During the attack, Genie died from the effects of the drug. When they realized she was unresponsive, they panicked and sought out a doctor, who came outside and confirmed her death. At the doctor's insistence, they removed Genie's body from his property. A few hours later, at approximately 5:30 to 6:15 a.m., Marinus Gary discovered Genie's body near the Wagara Bridge in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, on the Bergen County side of the Passaic River. Her body was found lying on a jagged rock with a fracture at the base of her skull, initially believed to be the cause of death. However, it was later determined that the skull fracture occurred post-mortem. The Trenton Times, on October 20th, 1900, described her body. She lay as though asleep. She was stretched out on her back, her hands laying at her side, palms downward, and fingers relaxed. One leg crossed the other at the ankle. Her dress was not disturbed and was stretched at full length. The coroner estimated her death occurred 2 to 3 hours before the discovery. A significant breakthrough came when Augustus Schulthorpe, the carriage driver, came forward and provided critical testimony. According to the Newark Daily Advocate, on January 29, 1901, Schulthorpe reported that on October 19th, 4 men carried an unconscious girl from Sal's Saloon into his coach at midnight. He was instructed to drive to a roadhouse, but upon finding it closed, he started back toward Patterson. During the return trip, the men took the girl from the coach and ill-treated her. George J. Kerr, Walter C. McAllister, Andrew J. Campbell, and William A. Deeth were subsequently indicted for Genie's murder. They were arraigned before Judge Dixon on November 17, 1900. Media coverage at the time emphasized that these men were not wild boys, but mature adults old enough to know the meaning of consequences. They were described as members of prominent, well-respected families in Patterson, which only intensified public outrage. The city of Patterson was stunned by the crime. Walter C. McAllister came from a prominent and wealthy family deeply embedded in the city's economic and social fabric. The McAllisters owned several businesses, including mills and breweries, employing many local residents. McAllister's father, a respected figure who had spent decades building his reputation, was devastated by the accusations against his son. His harsh advice to Walter, widely quoted in local newspapers, underscored his humiliation. George Kerr's family was equally well regarded. His father was known for his devout religious beliefs, while his brother John served as a judge, and his brother-in-law was the mayor of Paterson. George, a married man with 5 children, was awaiting the birth of his 6th child when the crime occurred. William A. Deeth, newly married into a prosperous family, had abruptly ended a relationship with Genie weeks earlier. Andrew J. Campbell, the youngest of the accused, and of working-class background, was well regarded in the community, and doubts about his involvement were more prominent than for the others. All 4 men pleaded not guilty, and their trial was set for January 14, 1901. Walter McAllister, Andrew Campbell, and William Deeth were tried together, while George Kerr's trial was separated at the last minute. Speculation arose that Kerr had turned state's evidence, but this was false. He had not been present when the fatal dose of chloral hydrate was administered. Genie's parents attended the trial, as did Deeth's young wife, Charlotte, Judge John Kerr, and other notable figures. The defense mounted a strategy that deflected blame, suggesting Genie's death was caused by absinthe rather than an overdose of chloral hydrate. They also criticized Genie's parents for allowing her out that evening, and cast apprehensions on Genie herself for accepting the men's invitation. In an effort to minimize the defendant's culpability, they even portrayed the accused as victims of Genie. The jury rejected these arguments, concluding that Genie's death was not due to absinthe and that her murder was not premeditated. Walter McAllister, Andrew Campbell, and William Deeth were found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years of hard labor, the maximum penalty allowed by law. After the convictions, George Kerr changed his plea to no contest to the charges of rape. He was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor, also the maximum penalty. All 4 men's appeals were denied, and their sentences stood, reflecting the severity of their crimes and the public outrage surrounding Genie's tragic death. Martha Boughton Borwick, also known as Mama Borwick, was born in Boone, Iowa, to Marcus Smith Borwick and his wife. She had 2 sisters, Jessie Octavia Borwick Pickens and Elizabeth Villita Borwick. Borwick earned both her Bachelor's of Arts and Master's of Arts degrees from the University of Michigan in 1892 and 1893. She later worked as a librarian in Port Huron, Michigan. In 1899, Martha Borwick married Edwin Cheney, an electrical engineer from Oak Park, Illinois. The couple had 2 children, John, born in 1902, and Martha, born in 1905. Prior to the birth of their children, they adopted Borwick's niece, Jessie Borwick Pickens, after her sister, Jessie Octavia Borwick Pickens, passed away during childbirth in 1901. Mama Borwick met Catherine Wright, the wife of architect Frank Lloyd Wright, through a social club. Shortly afterward, her husband, Edwin Cheney, commissioned Wright to design a home for them in Oak Park, Illinois, now known as the Edwin H. Cheney House. Borwick's sister, Elizabeth Villita Borwick, resided in an apartment on the lower level of the home. In 1909, Borwick and Wright left their respective spouses and traveled to Europe together. Wright returned to the United States about a year later, in October of 1910, while Borwick remained in Europe to seek a divorce from her husband on grounds of abandonment. During her time abroad, she developed an interest in translating the works of Swedish feminist writer Ellen Key, whose ideas she admired. In April of 1911, Wright's mother purchased land in her family's valley near Spring Green, Wisconsin, for Wright to design a home where he and Borwick could live after her divorce. Wright named the house Taliesin, which means shining brow in Welsh. Borwick returned to the United States in June of 1911 and spent the summer in Canada with her children while waiting for her divorce from Edwin Cheney, which was finalized on August 5th. She legally resumed using her maiden name and joined Wright at Taliesin later that month, where construction on the house was underway. The couple's arrangement drew public attention in December of 1911 when the press reported on their living situation at Taliesin. The local newspaper and Weekly Home News condemned Wright for bringing scandal to the village. National press coverage described their European trip as a spiritual hegira. dubbing Borwick and Wright soulmates and referring to Taliesin as a love castle or love bungalow. Chicago newspapers were particularly critical, speculating that Wright might face arrest for immorality, though the local sheriff stated there was no evidence of wrongdoing. The relationship was widely viewed as scandalous, especially since Wright's wife, Catherine, refused to grant him a divorce. The controversy tarnished Wright's reputation and impacted his career. He did not receive another major commission until 1913 with the design of the Midway Gardens. On August 15, 1914, Julian Carleton, a male servant from Barbados who had been hired several months earlier, set fire to the living quarters of Taliesin and murdered 7 people with an axe as they attempted to escape the blaze. Among the victims were Mama Borwick, her 2 visiting children, John and Martha Cheney, and several others: David Lindblom, a gardener, Emile Brodel, a draftsman, Thomas Bunker, a workman, and Ernest Weston, the son of Wright's carpenter, William Weston, who was injured but survived. Thomas Fritz also survived, and Weston helped extinguish the fire, which nearly destroyed the residential wing of the house. After the attack, Carleton attempted suicide by ingesting hydrochloric acid. He was found and nearly lynched, but was instead taken to the Dodgeville jail. Carleton died from starvation 7 weeks later, despite receiving medical care. At the time of the tragedy, Frank Lloyd Wright was in Chicago overseeing the construction of Midway Gardens. Mama Borwick was buried in the cemetery at Unity Chapel near Taliesin. Wright, who was later buried there in 1959, had his remains cremated in 1985 and reinterred at Taliesin West in Arizona.